Okay, I want to have a conversation about desire. Why? I don't really know. That's kind of the point. Okay, so like thinking about it. Okay, I feel like it's important for a number of different lenses. Like for one, like I'm very interested in the notion of like the karmic nature of desire, in terms of like the function of that and the function of the that concept within like Eastern philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, why it's so important, and also just like I don't know. It's a very like dual kind of thing, right? Because it's like the way it's like I like to see it as like the way that we kind of encounter or approach our experience of reality in general, right? It's like it kind of comes with like this dual function of also like fantasy as well. Like the function of fantasy and desire kind of go hand in hand, right? At least in like what that means, like why is it a pursuit to kind of transcend it? Why what is it about desire that binds us to this thing which we call the human experience, which we call life, right? Like, and I think fantasy is so super important to this kind of building off the ideas of like Zizek, or like Khan, like in terms of like the frameworks of like fantasy and as a means of accessing reality, and in the same sense it's like desire kind of manifests itself in the same way as like like the one kind of comes before the other, right? It's like we go through life and we have these things which we desire, right? These kind of abstract ideas, and it's like the way in which we access that, the way in which we understand reality, and the way in which we pursue goals, right? The way in which we actualize desires must first be facilitated through a construction of a symbolic order, right? Of that desire, like functioning. The desire must begin as like this kind of abstract thing which it remains undefined, and it is through our phantasmatic frame, right? Through the framing of desire, the means at which like the kind of the 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 narrative ways, like the ways in which we construct self, in which we identify ourselves within life, right? With the way we place ourselves and separate ourselves as like as individuals. And it's like that pursuit, and it's like ultimately the penultimate desire, right? The thing that remains when we have kind of stripped and transcended all of these things, at least, or have become, right, a Buddha, right, in the Eastern sense, or like a transcendent figure, somebody that has transcended desire. And it's like what remains is still the desire to exist, right? That is the fundamental session, right? Which must first be in order for us to pursue anything, right? Because, well, for one, like I mean, in order to have desire, number A, we must exist, and then B, it's like, let me slow down. Okay, it's like when you have a desire, right? You have a desire to do something. The way in which you begin to unpack that and understand that must first come from an understanding of reality, right? It's like you have a desire to get into a relationship, and it's like, well, first you must understand, well, one, what a relationship is, what that even looks like, right, in society, why that's valuable to you, why it is something that you desire. And it's like the only way that we really are able to access these kinds of concepts and these ideas is first through identifying the idea of them, right? The fantasy of them existing. And I think it's so interesting, right? It's like in like Zizek, and I've heard in various ways of thought, means of thinking. It's like the encounter of the actual, the encounter of the real, and the dissolving of desire through experience, right? Through having experiences where we actualize things and we actually experience them. It's like 99% of the time those things they're never what you actually imagine them to be. They're never exactly to the level of maybe how you desired it. It's like, but see, this is the interesting thing. Is it's like, why is that? Why is that? Like, why? It's like it's like the desire in and of itself is a kind of fantasy, right? It's almost a suspension of your belief at what it is that you are coming at. Like, you must kind of have a skewed idea of it in order to desire it in the first place, and then that desire places you within this larger system, right? A system of a way of understanding life, a way of understanding things, that then gives you the structures, right? The structures of reality to attack it, right? To approach that thing. And it's like it is both necessary for us to have that framework, in order to actually even transcend it in the first place. And so this is why I feel like it's truly contradictory, or like the contradictory nature of this makes it interesting when we apply it to the conversation of like Eastern philosophy, the trend, like in terms of transcending desire, and like how does one actually go about that? Is it even possible? Like, going back to the fundamental desire to exist, or not even necessarily desire, but it's like the fact that the desire precedes definition, right? It begins as some unfounded concept within you, like a feeling that you have within you to pursue something, and then it begins to actualize itself based upon the environment that you interact with, based upon the systems that you encounter, that you begin to construct, right? Phantasmatically access, right? Or fantastically access. This is the importance of of storytelling, and this is why I think that like story and symbol and narrative and like our narrative concept of things are the drive they are the driving things about reality. They are the most foundational ways at which we access and understand reality. Like it's not necessarily an empirical thing, right? Because that all has to come later. That all comes later after the actual framework of life, right? The concept of the world and reality as it exists must first be understood in order to be navigated. And so it's like, okay, and this is also why I feel like hedonism, right? The experience of pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure, is something that is well, not, major. Well, I don't want to say it's underrated. I think that actually hedonism is actually a lot more popular as a lifestyle, as a framework than people actually realize. Like on the whole, actually the major at least in in Western American culture, like the pursuit of pleasure is kind of the single defining like moral standpoint by which a lot of people, well, I won't say everybody, because there's definitely like blind there's an incentive to for people not to fully actualize that, not to fully understand or recognize that the that their desires are themselves products of the system, and like operate within the systems that people will concede to. But at the same time, it's like it also is like the only way at which we can transcend things. It's like the only this is like the symptom, right? The symptom of desire, the tragedy of desire is that ultimately these things will continue to persist until we are either able to transmute desire into like kind of shift our attention from one object to another, or to actually experience it, to encounter it, right? And that is when it becomes dissolved, right? And then this is the interesting thing, is it's like it's not that these design like it's not actually ever true, in the sense that like the fantastical desire that you might have, that you might entertain, that you might want like to actualize it oftentimes sorry, is the antithesis of, not the antithesis of, but like it kind of dissolves the suspended concept of like what it is that you're pursuing, right? It drops the illusion. It presents you with the reality of the thing, and then only after presented with that reality can you realize how kind of futile and fleeting that desire was that led you there in the first place. And then it brings you to this point of reflection, right? That is the transcendent notion of Eastern Buddhist thought, is that like only through, well, I don't know if this is necessarily a Buddhist idea, but at least in terms of like burning karma, right? Of just having experiences in the pursuit of, and I guess you could put it under a hedonistic lens, and whether or not that is positive or negative, but like that is how you burn through, that is how you kind of progress, right? That is the way that we grow, and we kind of are able to self-reflect and have a more deeper understanding of what it is that our fundamental desire is, right? Because if it couldn't just be the desire to exist, right? Because, well, I mean, doesn't everybody have that? But it's like there's this notion, right, of like that we have some individual desire, that is the distinctive quality, right? That it's like there is a desire within us to exist that separates us from others, in the sense that our desire to exist is unique to us, that your desire to do something is unique to you, and unique to your experience and your framework, in the way in which you access reality. And it's like nobody's experience of that is exactly the same, right? But it's like everybody's transcendence of that is unique to them, and unique to their life, and unique to their life pursuit. And so like this is why I think that hedonism, like as a philosophic frame, I know typically, like, the way that we understand hedonistic behavior, it kind of has this negative connotation as, well, I mean, I think part of this is like it's just heavy religious programming, and the like the what's it called, like attaching this like sinful nature, right, to pleasure, or attaching like this negative quality to pleasure, that pursuit of pleasure in and of itself is not a moral pursuit. But I think like it is not necessarily that it is not necessarily like that you are pursuing pleasure, that is the foundation, that is the foundation of your belief, of the way that you operate. But like, oh, fuck, I'm getting a call. Okay, I have to cut this. Okay, anyways, what I mean to do is like with this reframing of how we typically understand hedonism and why it is valuable. I feel like too often we miscontextualize, or like we view it from a very like Anglo Christian sort of lens, right? Which sort of just like criminalizes, not criminalizes, but like, just makes it appear less valiant than it is. But I think it is because of that like detachment. We don't often relate the pursuit of pleasure to at the same time, the recognition of desire, and that being a necessary stage in that process. And I think the fact that this is such a common like way of thinking within our society, I think is significant, and should be recognized more, because it's like, again, like the average person that you encounter on the street like does not necessarily have a moral framework, does not necessarily have a maxim, if you will, of the ways they live life, except for pleasure maxing, right? Except for wanting to make the most of their experiences, extract as much joy and as much excitement out of just encountering things and just living life, as a means of self-discovery. And we don't often recognize that, I feel like, at least in the language in which hedonism is concerned. And so, to bring this back into like sort of my belief and the way that I kind of view this whole thing, and as the things, and desire as the thing which binds us to this reality, which is the kind of fundamental quality of our existence, right? As it is necessary, right? It is not that we can't necessarily stop. We can't stop I mean, when you get into like suicidal tendencies, and the framework behind where that comes from, it is like that's kind of like I guess the manifestation of this, right? Is not the manifestation of it necessarily, but the exhaustion of the pursuit of that. It's like when you no longer find value in experiencing things and experiencing pleasure in this body, in this form, in this mediation of experience. It's like that is when the you have absolved the desire to exist, right? And then it then becomes, you try to take that out on oneself. But like that being a purely physical thing, it is like you can't mentally dissolve the desire to persist, or to see yourself as continually existing. That itself is not something that can be killed, right? That can die. And this is like when we get into the concepts of reincarnation, and like what really is the fundamental like maintaining of, like, if a being is to be reincarnated, and then carry the burden of that desire, right? That is kind of the foundation of how Eastern philosophy understands this concept, right? It's like you exist so long as you have desire to burn. You exist so long as the desire to experience things persists. And it's like, just because you decide to you make the conscious choice to end your physical experience, doesn't mean that desire necessarily, that extingent quality has actually been absolved, right? Most people will say that, well, sucks for you, you have to do it again, right? At least in that view, which is, I don't say this in any way to be diminutive and to minimize that thing, that struggle is very real. Like that itself, I think, I would argue arises from the absurdity of like to really recognize like the nature of like that symbolic order, and that all of these things are essentially only really accessed through the mediation of fantasy, through the construction of systems in which we can then pursue desire. That is a very striking thing. Like that can trigger a lot of interesting reactions, interesting psychological, emotional reactions, in the ways that we act and the ways that we do that. But anyways, yeah. So again, like the way in which that Eastern philosophy will stipulate that it is the continuation of being, or that is the single defining quality as in terms of like who you are, and that it is unknown, right? That is what is that is what really like interests me. Is like what is left? Can we even say that there is such a thing as an individual desire, so much as there is just, everybody's desire to exist. And this is like when you get down to the theories of like single consciousness, that we are all just sort of like consciousnesses, our own consciousness experiencing itself at different times, at different stages, at different points in human history, that are highly specific to, in order to burn these specific desires, these specific karmas in which we carry, right? And that nature, right, the nature of existence, it being a thing that transcends time itself, right? If we're really talking about like single consciousness, and the idea that, well, if you really were able to split it up, like if the desire to exist could be attributed to the single defining characteristic of like humanity, then you could then take the perspective that everyone that has ever lived is essentially just a manifestation of that single consciousness desiring to experience itself in a specific, in a very specific time, in a very specific way, in a way that only under those circumstances could actually actualize the desire of the individual, of that consciousness, to experience itself. And I think this, especially, when you take this into relationships, when you take this into encountering other people in other stages of development, other stages of consciousness, it's like we're all just trying to fundamentally understand the same thing. And like that process, like, I think we we should give things like hedonism a little bit more credit, for their, or at least validity in the pursuit of understanding what this thing called life is, what this thing called the desire to experience things is, and then take it as a first step, right? Because that's really all that it is the first step. Is like, because once you have decided, right, if you consciously, subconsciously, ultimately decide to organize your life around just the value of experience, the value of having experiences for the sake of experiences, then that itself becomes the teaching moment, right? The moment in which you are able to transcend, the moment in which you are able to transcend the experiences that you pursue, to then add to a higher, greater understanding of yourself, an understanding of what it is that you are here to do, what it is that you are here to experience, and kind of just trusting, and, well, I don't want to say trusting, but appealing to that higher sense that there is a penultimate desire that you are kind of striving towards, that you are attempting to resolve, attempting to transcend. And then we get to I guess I'm thinking of the concept of like a bodhisattva, which is something that is very specific to the Buddhist tradition, which I think is interesting. That essentially, I mean, there's different trains of thought around how a bodhisattva is discussed. Some, in a lot of sense, they are historical figures more so than just like frameworks. But in terms of like the way that we can understand the function of a bodhisattva as somebody that has transcended and yet still chooses or still chooses to remain, rather than ascend. And that to me is even more interesting, right, within this framework, because it's like they have, once you have dissolved, right, the tendency to desire, the once you have transcended, like the fundamental desire of existence, that you could still then choose to remain. I feel like, is that not contradictory? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? You know what I mean? Because it's like, and maybe this is really just a means of explaining like this phenomena of when we encounter a person, when we truly encounter somebody that like genuinely strikes us as just further along, right, as somebody that has had a similar experience to you. And I think this is like kind of this kind of goes to the transmission of like all information or just memory as recollection, which, I mean, just goes back all the way to like the fucking natural philosophers. I forget who it is that introduced the concept of memory as recollection. But the idea that like if we do appeal to this sense, right, to this higher sense of self that defies any particular place in time, that like memory as recollection and things that are true, things that are foundational to identity, kind of exists sort of as a recollection of past experiences, of karma, right, of desire that you have already burned, things that you have already transcended, things that you have already learned, that then becomes the aggregate of what your identity is, right, kind of the formal qualities of who you are based upon what you have experienced. And so that is how we are then able to identify like people that are then bodhisattvas, right, because it's almost like it's like real recognize real, basically. It's like consciousness encountering itself in that sense, right? Because you, it is only through that recollection, that recognition of somebody that is familiar, right? Like this again. This even goes back to the foundations of like intuition and why things resonate to us intuitively, because it is an appeal. It's an appeal to that higher self. It's an appeal to the transcendent self, which like which has already experienced this, and like that is something that if we follow this through to like encountering other people as just encounters of your own consciousness, that becomes recollection. It's like things are true, and a person is knowledgeable, and a person is closer to that identification because we can recognize through that function of memory, of intuition, that they have experienced things, that they have transcended them, because we have experienced things, and we have transcended those experiences. We have progressed beyond that point. And so it's like, in that sense, it's like, yes, these things must exist. That's almost like I don't know. I don't really know where or how I would, where else I would go for that. I'm kind of just, yeah, yapping, honestly. But anyways, going back into the notion of the interaction of desire and fantasy specifically, right? And the ways that we access these things. It's like fantasy, again, going back to like fantasy and storytelling as kind of the foundational way at which we access things. Like, it kind of goes back to the concept of an archetype, right? The archetypes of people, the archetype of self that ultimately like we are appealing to, right? And it's like when you get down to why like what is that defining characteristic, that defining desire to exist, the persistence of an archetype, the persistence of an identity, that exists simply because it has, in the past, for years of humans' experience, right? That idea persists, right? I feel like is almost evidence of the way that it is kind of like a single track consciousness. And it's like, I honestly, like, I really think maybe this is like a really really condescending outlook to have, but like I really feel like I can meet people and kind of just like recognize and see like at what stage that they're in. Like, oh, you haven't quite encountered this idea yet. You haven't quite burned the desire to experience this thing yet. And it's like, it's such like an internal feeling, like, wow, like I have been where you have been, and it doesn't necessarily merit that like you guys have lived the exact same life, so much is that you have approached it through a similar level of through the same consciousness, essentially. Because like, to the extent that like like individuality and personality is like, I mean, you can go to like, Neil Diamond's geographical determinism, that like the purely empirical sense that like in the nature versus nurture, like environment completely determines who it is you will become. And it's like that can be true to the extent that at the same time, if you get down to the fundamental, like the quality of consciousness, and that is transitory, and that you could put that and like, instill that within any other body, within any other physical environment, and that it would still approach it in the same way, with the same like fundamental phantasmatic and approach to encountering life and encountering desire, that like it's transitory. Like, you can refute that. You can like you can fundamentally empathize with anybody else's experience on that level. And then in the same way, it's like you can then recognize what it is people have encountered and what it is they haven't. And like, I think for me, that in and of itself is kind of like evidence of this recollection, because and it's not recollection in the sense of like an actual memory that you have, that is like a shared experience, but so much as like you can recollect a time in your life when you were like this. You can recollect a time in which you took a similar frame, you approached life with a similar framework, based upon your experience, based upon where you come from, the things that you have done. So yeah. And then, what is the role of fantasy within all of this? I keep trying to talk about this and end up getting distracted. But again, like I think that we like the recognizing that our pursuits, the drive, any drive that we have, and that any desire that we must actualize must first be accessed through a phantasmatic frame, through an understanding of like the systems and how they work, and that we must have this idyllic notion in order to first set out on like a hero's journey. I mean, that's like essentially the foundational framework of any story, right? It is the journey, the venturing out, and that is usually incited by, some fundamental desire, some fundamental lack. It is like growth and change is the characteristic of any kind of story, right? And it's like the archetypal figures that we associate with typical heroes' journeys, typical paths, typical experiences of life. It's like that is essentially what you are appealing to when you are constructing your own self-identity, your own self-concept. You are appealing to the notion that you are the sum of your experiences, and that in taking that journey and in the pursuit of the ultimate fundamental desire of understanding who you are, understanding who you are as an individual, what your story is, what your narrative is, how you fit narratively into the world that you have also constructed simultaneously within a narrative. And like this, and it's like this is the interesting thing to me, because I hear so much discussion, right, about not having non-narrative thinking, and not attaching narratives to things, to certain things, to certain people. And it's like I don't want to disagree with it, because like to an extent, like it's good. It is good to have an awareness of this, right? It is good to have an awareness of how this process affects the ways that we encounter the world, and the ways that we have experiences with each other, and the way that it kind of can bias us and set us up for failure, essentially, right? When we have this like totally fantastical view of how things should and play out, and how life should go, how experiences should be dictated. But at the same time, I can't override the necessity of, like, how can you ever really escape narrative thinking? Is it even possible? Because even the narrative, right? The idea that you could encounter yourself and stop yourself from placing yourself within a narrative is in itself a narrative, right? And I don't mean to be semantic. I don't mean to like dissolve this into an endless loop, but like genuinely I want to encounter this idea and kind of flip it, that it is both sides, right? Because for one, yes, it is helpful to recognize, but at the same time, we need that, because if we don't have like if we don't have a framework to approach anything, like if we truly see ourselves as non-narrative beings, as people that don't need narrative, then we just become absurdists. Like we become almost, I don't know, meaningless, because it's like the thing about meaning, and the thing about desire and self, is that you are who you are in spite of your experiences, not because of them. Ultimately, right? That is the difference in the way that we I think we ought to think about these, because it's like in the one sense, like that like that's a kind of I think in the way that people are critiquing this idea is from a purely empirical standpoint, that like that the narratives themselves can only be restrictive, whereas I think if you were able to take the framework that, well, if you can become the master of your own narrative, right? If you can recognize the power of what it means to actually define a narrative for yourself, and to kind of take what you have as reference, in terms of like where it is that you come from, the symbolic order that you have been indoctrinated into, and then based upon that, then make the conscious choice to divert that, to forge your own path, to create your own story. That again, I think you just kind of fall for the delusion of, of archetype of individuality, of thinking that you are different, that somehow you can transcend the narratives of your own life. And yeah, I think I would question that. I don't really know. I don't really know where I stand on that. But it's like, I think there is value in us recognizing that we can be our own storytellers. I mean, this is kind of like going back to any kind of like oral tradition, the passing down of narratives, that is kind of the almost the fundamental like cultural exchange, right? When you get down to it, it's like when you get down to the value systems and the ways that stories kind of ultimately perpetuate and can teach us the most about the way societies think, the way people think. It really is through the phantasmatic framework, through the stories the archetypes that they most identify with. That is what defines differences in cultures and in experiences, right? In terms of like how people from different societies come to understand their self-concept, come to understand their place in the world. It is through stories, it's through storytelling. And so that's why I think like the act of creation, right? The act of creating a narrative and the act of becoming your own storyteller, and why that position, right, in a lot of cultures, especially in like African cultures, like the burden of storytelling is so much more strongly revered in these places. Like they don't people like that, they don't take for granted the power which narrative holds, right? And I mean, you can carry that into literally anything, right? But like the like we need to I think come back to a space where we are able to venerate and emphasize like the importance of storytellers and the importance of people that can redefine narratives and can alter narratives within society, because that is the fundamental like struggle against things as they are, the struggle against societies. Oh my god. Hopefully I've been interrupted for the last time. But who knows? It's okay. I don't really care. So I want to close this out kind of with this last kind of thought. I don't know if I don't know if it's tying it together in any way whatsoever. But just kind of a funny little thing I was thinking about. There was this, guys. I have a confession to admit. I used to be a really big Jaden Smith fan. Okay, prior to like his whole like interviews thing, where like back in the day, bro. That was like peak that was like peak Calabasas, like Hidden Hills collective type music coming out. Like that's when he would pop out. That's when he would pop out of the Commons, and like you'd see him at Barnes and Noble, and like, oh my God, Jaden Smith. Like he hadn't quite tarnished his reputation so much. Although it's like, guys, just because he like takes psychedelics often, is that really enough to like just throw him under the bus? Like, how many of us do that? How many of us do that? Honestly, realistic. And like I do fuck with his like I do fuck with his style. Like I think his brands are actually actually pretty good, like in terms of like being inventive and subversive, not necessarily for that. But anyways, he said this thing at one point that I think about often, that is basically like we learn through imitation. We find ourselves through imitating others. He probably got this idea from somewhere else. Now that I think about it, now that I'm saying it out loud, but it's like, but he was referring. I mean, he was referring to fashion essentially, in the vein of fashion, that like the way that we find our style, the way that we find our style with, and this could be carried into anything, as a quality, is like through the imitation, right? That is kind of the the thing that the grain of salt that we must take, right, when we think about art as both an institution and as its own like independent undefined thing, is that we must first be introduced to the idea of something, systemically, symbolically, and what it looks like, in order to then have a frame of reference for where else we're going to take it, how we want to change it, how we think it should be defined instead. And the same is true of ourselves, right? It's like, and again, going back. So again, going back to this idea of like hedonism, going back to the idea of the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of things for the sake of finding oneself, and that like you can't just simply override doing things for the sake of doing them, even if they are, even if they do appear to you and approach you under the guise of this, of a mainstream trend, of this whatever, because it's like that is the thrill of existence, if you will, is to be able to indulge in every vein, every facet of this new thing, and actually discover if you fuck with it or not. Like actually find out, like actually fuck around and find out. That's basically, if you could take away anything from this video, it's fuck around and find out. Okay, that is the life philosophy, which I think is helpful, and the funny thing is like, especially when you get to like Zizek and Lacanian theories of fantasy and desire, it's like there's not really a resolution to this idea. There's not really like a closing of the loop. I mean, basically it's like there is a lack, there is a desire to fill something, some undefined void, and you can either and it really just comes down to how you fill it at the end of the day. Guys, how do I fill this void within me, basically, type shit. So yeah, I mean, fuck around and find out, and it's like fall in love with the process. That's kind of like the whole thing. That's basically the whole thing. And I mean, it's like even when we come back to the concept of like the journey. Why do stories even exist, right? If a story was only valuable for the end, we wouldn't tell stories. We wouldn't have stories. We wouldn't have fantasy. The process is the important part, and that like I think we need to, when it comes to art, and when it comes to like avant-garde shit, and shit that is media that is subversive, it is purely because of its striking absurdity in the journey, and the way and the methodology that it arrives at the point that it does. That like is so striking to us. That is what defines, like era defining art. That is what changes, it shifts fundamentally, like our understanding of what things can be. And so therefore, it is also equally as accessible to shift your own self-concept, to recognize what it is that you can be instead, purely through experience. Because I mean, the reality is, like, we get so attached to particular cycles, repetition, right? And I mean, that really is like kind of everything, right? Even in terms of like storytelling, right? The narratives and the way that our world is defined is because we have been repeating these stories, and because we have been repeating these experiences over and over again for hundreds of years, that these systems persist, that these ways of thinking persist. And in the same sense, it's like, if you become this stagnant, like someone that is so attached to an immediate identity, you're cheating yourself out. You're cheating yourself out of this thing called life. The pursuit of your actual desire, by masking it with this kind of like, I don't know, simplicity, that somehow your life will be better if you don't go out and do the things. And it's like, that is how that's how you suppress emotions. That's how you suppress yourself. That's how you end up, that's how your desire gets misplaced. Basically, you will manifest. You will begin to manifest, like, what it is that you want in all the wrong places, and it will take shape in things that will keep you stagnant and will keep you stuck in the same loops, when, like, really you should just be saying fuck it and doing things for the sake of doing them. Like, at the end of the day, well, take it with a grain of salt, because this is just me. This is just a guy talking at you and into a shit ass computer camera in his dorm room in the middle of, on a Monday night. So, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, keep telling stories, keep doing shit. Hashtag Jaden Smith was right. We should have been thinking about the political and economic state of the world at that time. So I hope, this will all age better than not. Yeah.